more, more specifically, an important part of this is the eggs only last for 3 days before they turn into the larvae, and then eventually they get capped right around day 9. Okay, so that's good. We're moving on. We're getting good through our progression, 21 days. It's an important thing to recognize. I should also mention a lot of beekeepers like to simplify this progression in terms of the first week, first 7 days as uncapped. You can't see the cap here, right? And then the rest of the 14 days, even though day 8 is kind of, still uncapped, it's a simplified way of saying the bees spend basically 1 week uncapped and 2 weeks capped. And again, I'm gonna go back a couple slides. So uncapped and capped. All right, so moving on. That was kind of worker stuff, things to think about, things to be excited about. I know for the older time beekeepers, seeing all that brood just coming about, it'll be here in a couple months. Frames and frames of uncapped brood, frames of capped brood. The queen comes in a variety of colors. Sometimes you'll have her nice and dark with some stripes on it. Sometimes she'll be nice and orange and solid. One of the things I love to look for when I'm looking for queens is the relatively bald thorax, not a lot of hair. That black spot kind of sticks out. So how we looked at the workers being born, how would you describe queens and how they're born, how they're raised? What would be unique? This is question number 6. How would you know your colony is going to make queens? Okay, you give them good jelly, good royal jelly, good nutrition. They have special cells.
You keep giving them royal jelly even after the other, you stop with the other bees.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Now, for a beginning beekeeper, it's not going to be probably possible to see the feeding. So if you want to see this, what would you be looking for in the colony?
Raised cells.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking for vertical cells that hang facing downward open, as opposed to the horizontal cells, right, of the workers, and as we'll see, drones in a second. So I was giving a class the other day, and I was talking about bees, and I was saying, man, we are so lucky as beekeepers that the queen cells are vertical. Could you imagine if queen cells were horizontal right next to everybody else? They'd be so much harder to pick out. So these are very special cells, and the bees can remove wax and put them in the middle of frames, or they can just stick them off the ends at the very bottom, usually. In the natural colonies, usually in the bottom portion of the lowest most portion of the frames. And I see Casey says peanut-shaped cells, and that comes from this sort of awkward texture, or maybe not awkward, but sort of peanutty texture. It's kind of got little rivets or something in it. And they start off really small. The egg, technically the zygote, yeah, gets laid in here. And then as she develops, it elongates around her for her pupation chamber. All right, number 7. Now, how long does it take from egg to adult to make a queen? So we know it's 21 days for the workers. Question number 7. A couple people say 16 days, and we had that other person said 16 days for the worker. 21 days, possibly. And the answer is 16 days. And that's, pretty tight, not perfect. But again, similarly, the egg will last for 3 days, uncapped, uncapped, uncapped for 7 days. So again, a week progression, and then eventually emerging on day 16. And this drawing is very accurate in that the queen will emerge downward because the cell is facing vertically and the opening is downward. So I like to tell beekeepers, especially at the beginning of the year, it's a great time to refresh all the things that you should know as you move through the year. And one of them is the loveliness of numbers and mathematics and arithmetic, because those numbers will be useful in your ability to predict what your colony is going to look like in a week or 2 weeks or potentially 3 weeks. All right, next we move on to the drones. And the demographics here are definitely older than most of the students that I teach in college. So I love to show this image, and you got 3 male drones here, and I always think of the movie Three Amigos. And my students, the young ones, have no idea what I'm talking about. So some of you may, and I apologize if you have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, Steve Martin and a couple other people. So big eyes, right? Tips of the abdomen relatively round, not so pointy like the other bees, and pretty fuzzy thorax. How would you describe how drones are raised? How are they put? Where are they made in the colony? What do they look at? Or what do they look like? How is it different from workers and queen cells? How would you describe it? So question number 8, getting a little bit into some more detail here. I gave away a little bit of the answer earlier. Okay, so deep cells, caps elongated, one way to think about it. They're fat, they have fat cells. Drones have a bigger bubbly cap. Brian says unfertilized eggs. That's super, super awesome. So they're just eggs. They develop from just eggs. Technically they're, all the scientific definitions of eggs are all unfertilized. So larger cells, raised cell cap, located on the edges and bottoms of frames. Yeah, a little bit more than the rest. So definitely larger cell. Here's a picture where roughly split down the middle in this red area, you've got drones that are capped. And these caps, you can see by the shading, have sort of a dome, look at my hand, right? Dome shape appearance. Whereas we'll do green, this bottom portion here, these caps are flat, relatively speaking. There's a little bit of topography to them, but they're relatively flat. And if you look at 2 very close together cells, this size, oops, let me do this the right colors. The size of the worker hexagon is just a little bit smaller than the size of the drone's hexagon. And again, that size is going to determine how big the bee gets inside of it. So it is entirely possible through accident or potentially just being creative and fun and ridiculous and weird, where a worker zygote or egg gets laid in a drone cell, or a drone's egg gets laid in a worker cell. And so you can end up with drones the size of workers or workers the size of drones. And some of you may know that when people do beekeeping, they often choose a foundation with a specific hexagon size. That size can vary, and the resulting bees will vary in size relative to that particular cell size. Okay, so different. And again, we're really lucky as keepers of these organisms that they make it really obvious and distinct for us once you know kind of what to look for. We get a good understanding quickly with a quick glance, the ratio, how much drone is in production, how much worker is in production, are there queens being made? And as a beginning beekeeper, think about trying to internalize some of that information. What are these ratios? Because if you've got a lot of drones popping out, or drones coming out of worker size cell, that can mean the difference between life and death of your colony potentially. So be aware of these patterns and try and look for them. All right, so next question, since we got to be complete here, how long does it take to raise a drone? So worker is 21 days, queen is 16 days. What is it for those drones? So I see a lot of 24s filtering in, and of course, we've got a lot of smart beekeepers here. They are in that 24-day range. Lucky for us, the eggs are also only going to last 3 days. So another thing to learn across all the bees is whenever you see eggs, those eggs were there within the last, or were laid within the last 3 days. Once they hit day 4, you're going to expect to see the larvae. So when you're doing your queen inspections, you don't always have to find the queen. You can look for those eggs or zygotes, whichever you wish to look for. That gives you some understanding about how long that queen has been there recently, even if you can't find her. Okay. All right, moving on. And again, I just want to plug the website. I don't know who this person is, but they did an amazing job just kind of throwing it all together. So, all right. So the bees don't hang out isolated, they hang out together. If you were to see this hanging from a tree branch, what would you call this? Curious what kind of things will come out of the minds of our beekeepers. So we're getting swarms, free bees, A bivy. So some people will call this freebies because if you get them, you didn't have to pay for them, right? You just put them in your boxes, which is great. And obviously the most consistent answer at this point is swarm. And so this is a temporary colony of bees in that they're probably not going to stay there. They're out scanning the landscape, trying to figure out where are we going to live next. The European honeybee is a cavity nesting bee. So in general, they don't like to be open on exposed branches like this. It is not impossible. I have seen a few honeybee colonies hanging out in willow trees, which are super shady. And they're like, this is mostly like a cavity, you know, it's all good and they can hang out. But generally speaking, they're just looking for another home. So in this group of bees is going to be a queen and a series of workers. Every now and then they'll bring drones with them, but that's not something to always expect. And what's going to be happening is these bees are going to look for nest sites all over the area. They're going to be dancing to each other to tell each other which places to look at. And then eventually they'll make a group-based decision to go to that particular cavity. The queen will follow them and they'll immediately lay eggs so that, they'll draw the comb out so that the queen can lay eggs, because how long is it before they get new workers? 21 days. So they have to survive, right, with this group of bees until that replenishment happens. So they have to lay down that comb first, then they have to get the eggs put down, okay? So good old swarms. And if you haven't trapped a swarm yet, it is definitely something you should attempt as a beekeeper, although we strongly recommend going with people that know what they're doing and have done it before. And I'm sure you guys are going to be pulling together your swarm list, Puget Sound beekeepers, at some point. So definitely as a beekeeper, it's one of those skills that it's good to have, capturing swarms. All right, so there's those different kinds of bees, right? The queens, the workers, the drones. They do really cool things. They sometimes swarm around, and we like to put them into boxes. So here's a typical smattering of woodenware in a pretty standard Langstroth colony. It's kind of put out here. So what we're going to do is go through each piece. And again, this is geared more towards the beginning beekeeper. So you've seen the words and all this stuff, and now we get to play with the audience and see what you call these things. So number 11, on this star, what would you call this part of the Langstroth colony? So question number 11. Okay, we got cover, roof, lid, telescoping cover, telescoping lid. So again, for beginning beekeepers, the terminology, you know, you're not necessarily sure about everything. And all of those names are totally valid. Outer cover. And this is going to be placed on the very top of the colony typically, and it is the primary weather prevention piece of equipment. So no rain gets in there, right? Keeps everything closed up. All right, moving on to the next thing would be inner cover. Good. Kathy, you were quick on that draw. So this is question number 12, inner cover, inner cover, inner cover. A lot of times, especially during the colder parts of the year, if you want to open the bees, the inner cover is useful because the bees will seal along the edge of the next box. And so you can take the outer cover off and you don't break the seal because the inner cover is still sealed on these boxes. And that just keeps the bees well protected. All right, next box, what would you call this? Okay, so I'm seeing shallow, shallow super, honey super, super. Are you talking about me or the box? Am I super or is it just the box? Small 10 framed Langstroth box. Super Nida. Where's my cape? Where's my cape? My hair's not long enough. I just drape it out with my cape. So definitely super is based upon this configuration. And we use the term super to refer to things that are superior to the brood, above the brood. And a lot of people also included the term honey in this because this is where you typically find honey, in the superior portions of the colony, so up towards the top. You might also call this a a shallow. I'm not sure it's actually shallow. I can't tell from the space. I have no idea what the size is here, but I think it might actually be a Western or a medium-sized box. So you might see that as well. All right, moving along. What would we call this? For question number, oh, is this still question number 11? I must have forgot to change that number. Don't pay no attention. Okay, so this is rolling in a deep or a brood box. Okay. And again, this is all tilted sideways, so this would be kind of down towards the bottom. Deep box. So the deeps for the terminology are coming in because of the depth of the box. It's got more depth to it. And the term brood box definitely is referring to this configuration where you've got your queen excluder here. Underneath that, you're going to expect to see most of the brood. And again, it's towards the bottom. The bees like to build down to the bottom where they want to put their brood on the bottom. And one of the things I wanted to open up and clarify for beginning beekeepers for sure is the term brood box is anything with brood in it, right? It's a functional classification. That's what's in there. This term deep refers to a structural classification, right? And we want to make sure we don't conflate structure and function. So this is a deep box, and in this configuration, we would likely see brood in it. But it is entirely possible for beekeepers to put a deep box up here and get honey in it, right? So just understand there's two different ways to think of these boxes: a structural definition where this is a deep, and a functional definition where it would be expected to have brood in it. Same thing is true. You could pull down one of these other smaller boxes, the medium, and put it below that queen excluder, and you could find brood in there as well. So it's entirely possible to have deep brood boxes, deep honey supers, Western brood boxes, and Western honey supers. Okay. So again, I think for beginning beekeepers, sometimes those terms are used a little too interchangeably, but we don't want to conflate the structure of the box with what goes in it, the function. But this is one of the more common sets of boxes. You may also know that many beekeepers use just mediums. Some beekeepers use just deeps, and they get brood in some of them and honey in others, so forth and so on. All right, now the star is moving on. And question number 14, what would you call that piece of equipment there? I know the star is kind of blocking some of the main parts of it. Okay, so somebody call it a bottom board. Some people call it a bottom. You get a little more specific. What kind of a bottom board? Bottom board, a solid bottom board, yes. And there's your entrance introducer here. The solid bottom board, because this is all material. This one's wood, right? And this is opposed to the screen bottom boards where that wouldn't be solid, it would be a screen instead. And again, this is just there to give the bees an entrance at the bottom of this stack of boxes. You can see there's a piece of wood that's above the plane of the board itself, but in the front there is not that little piece of wood sticking up. So that's a place where they go in and out. All right, moving along, number 15. What will we call this? And this part I think is probably the least standard of everything here. One person called it junk, one person called it a fancy lifter, a landing board, a landing platform. Is this actually in this configuration? I think it might double as the hive stand as well, although that's very close to the ground for my purposes. But at the bottom, underneath the entrance, you typically don't want your bees on the floor, so you have something to get them off the ground. Some people decide to put them on the roofs. Some people put them on cinder blocks, pallets, so forth and so on. But the term landing board is coming from this extra piece here on the front that is going to extend off the front of the colony. And what's going to happen is bees are going to land on this frequently and then crawl their way into the colony. So that's why that's referred to as a landing board or a landing platform. And this can be useful. Obviously, you can see the bees going in directly as well. It just gives you some more time to see them as they're going through. Another place to hang out, I'd like to think of it as like the stoop. You know, all the girls are hanging out on the stoop. But you can also see what they're carrying with them as they crawl up. And one of the most important things to recognize is the pollen that they're bringing in, particularly when you start seeing gray pollen in June in our region, which means what? Good old Himalayan blackberry is coming. And if you don't have space or supers on, it's a good indication to start throwing those on. Our research at Green River College indicates that some, maybe even most colonies put on more honey during the Himalayan blackberry flow than the rest of the year combined. So it's a very, very important portion of your beekeeping year to recognize. And those, those landing boards will help you see that a little easier. Although as you get more experience, you'll see that gray pollen everywhere and just be like, oh my gosh, it's time to go. You'll pull your frame out and there'll be gray pollen. Like, oh my gosh, they found it already. So it's time to act. But we are a little bit off in terms of that. What would you call that piece? We've already said it before, but we wanted to make sure we return to that. This is question 16, good old queen excluder. And if you ask enough beekeepers, should I use a queen excluder? Oof, the debate will rage endlessly. A lot of people, especially for production, say use it, use it, use it, because it allows you to separate very easily brood on one side and honey on the other side. And other beekeepers will say no, because the queen doesn't have freedom to move where she wants, and a variety of other things. So, some beekeepers use it, some don't. And the way that it works is it provides a small, narrow gap, and the workers can get through it, but the queen can't get through it. So it's just a physical filter to keep her from moving past it. And it is entirely possible, ask enough of the older time beekeepers, that sometimes you're doing an inspection and she ends up here, and then your honey becomes filled with a little bit of brood, or she'll crawl out and get in an upper entrance, or who knows how she gets up there. And so it's like, oh, it's supposed to keep the brood and honey separate, and it doesn't work all the time. But it works 99% of the time. So good old beekeeping stuff, good old stories. All right, the next thing, especially for the beginning beekeepers, you got to get a suit at some point. And so I'm curious, question 17, take a moment. What kind of suit do you use, beekeepers? And we've got some options here. Feel free to say whatever you need to say. There's sort of the fencing mask. There's sort of the sombrero mask. So the fencing mask can collapse a little bit. The sombrero kind of sticks out. There's cloth material, and there's that newer mesh material. There's a full suit, which would cover your entire body, legs, thorax, arms, veil. There's the half suit, which usually just goes down to the waist. So it's a jacket, more or less. And then there's just the veil only. And of course, there's an option where, maybe you don't use a suit all the time. And then I put an extra category here called zippers. And the only reason I put that on there is because two things, actually. Where the zippers connect up top to the veil, you often have a very, very small little gap where the metal doesn't overlap. And sometimes the bees crawl up in that little hole. There they are on your neck and all up in your face. And for beginning beekeepers, that can be an absolute nightmare. Actually, I think for all beekeepers, that's kind of an absolute nightmare. And so get a little piece of duct tape, put it on like your morning tie or whatever, and just be ready for that, okay? The other thing about zippers is, for me, when I purchase beekeeping equipment, I want the thickest, most beautiful, bold, bright, solid zipper I can get. Because once the zippers stop working, the whole suit fails and the bees can find their way in. So the stronger the zipper, the better overall, the longer it will last. So we see a bunch of stuff. Some people are using full suits, alternate between half suit and veil, definitely depending on the time of year, ultra breeze jacket, fencing mask style. Somebody's using tape. And a lot of the suits definitely have Velcro to try and get rid of that gap, and other places. So you can see here, there's a little Velcro piece that's coming down to try and block that hole. But if it bunches up right there, that bees can crawl up in there. And ask your friendly beekeepers, and they'll tell you all these horror stories about bees just finding their way through the holes. And I always like to tell beekeepers, when you have your hive tool and you put it away in your suit, whenever you have metal going against cloth, metal wins. And slowly but surely, there will be a hole in your suit somewhere, and the bees will find it before you. So be mindful of that. All right, beekeepers, which do you use most? And we've got a couple options. We've got, this is question 18, the standard pry bar, the good old J hook. Do you use both? Do you have something else? I know when I started beekeeping, my mentor only used pry bars. And ever since I learned about the J hook, I'm like upset with my mentor, because the J hook has that special ability to pull out the very first frame that is just magic compared to trying to use other tools to do it. So it's the right tool for the right job. I actually typically use both, although sometimes I forget my hive tool. So maybe just, feel free to throw in some comments. What do you do when you forget your hive tools? I'll tell you what I do. I'll show you. I go like this with my keys. All right, which one of these can I which one of these do I not need today if I break it? And so there I am trying to, break open a hive with keys, and it's horrible because there's no leverage, right? But I will say a flathead screwdriver in a pinch can take you places when it comes to just needing to get in and do something real quick with the bees. All right, so we'll move on. And then there's the smoker. So beekeepers, let me know, how often do you use this? Some people, every time. Some people, absolutely never. Some people, whenever I remember to bring it. So forth and so on. And I think it's important for beginning beekeepers to recognize that depending on the circumstance, and we've got the Hannah's over here from Arizona, and Arizona's going to have a higher tendency of, aggressive killer bees potentially. You might need it every time because the bees are going to be really at you. Depending on your particular hive, they may be very docile, but I fully recommend having it just in case, because you never know what a bee colony is going to feel like that day and how they're going to feel about you getting in their home. So it'll be surprising sometimes how dramatic they will respond to your presence and try and defend and keep you out. And again, make sure you're putting in the due diligence to put your smokers out afterwards, especially in the summer months, so we don't have too many extra fires. I've actually known quite a few people in firefighting, wildland firefighters, and there was a couple hives that, there were a couple fires that were started from left out smokers. So be mindful of that. Okay. All right. If you don't already have bees, what's your plan to get your bees? There's lots of options. What are you seeing? So you could get some from friends, or you could just have overwintered colonies, right? These are possible. That's how you have your bees this year. You could get them from nukes. You can get them from packages. You could be going for the swarm. And I think for a lot of beginning beekeepers, the package is probably the standard way you'll get your bees. It's a very safe way to do it because they're already a full-fledged colony. They've got a queen and workers. The workers are the same, offspring as that queen usually. They've got brood, they've got honey, they've got pollen, so forth and so on. The price of these keeps going up. How many of you can remember being able to get a nuke for under $100? Don't think that's happening anytime soon. I think most places are above 150, if not 160 these days. So be mindful out there as well. The sooner you get to becoming a sustainable beekeeper by splitting your colonies, the less you're going to have to pay for those. And as a beginning beekeeper, it's something to work towards. Okay. And then probably the most interesting question for me, and feel free to fill up the chat on this one. Question number 21, why do you keep honeybees? What's the motivation? Because it's a lot of work, there's a lot of woodenware, it's a lot of details, a lot of time to spend. And obviously different people spend a different amount of time. And here I have a picture of a former student staring, you can see, in contemplation at this bee. I'm very much keeping bees for educational purposes. So I want to teach. I want to show people this beautiful, beautiful creature. I'm here today because PSBA recognizes I love the bees, and it's important to get hyped up about them, right? you can get bogged down in this and that and the diseases and all that, but like this is an amazing, amazing creature. And I don't think I've ever met someone who says, "Oh, I've learned everything about bees. I don't know, I don't need to know anything else," right? There's always some level of curiosity that they will bring to you. And one of the things I always want to impart as a sort of lesson or something to just remind ourselves of is, you know, as humans, we've done a lot of amazing things. And one of the things we can't do as we move into our new technological world is forget our connection with nature. And the honeybee is one of those special, special species that allow us to recognize how connected we are, because they do a lot of things that depend on those connections in nature. And I think a lot of beekeepers, especially beginning beekeepers in today's world, are thinking that way. And so, you know, one of the things to drive the point home that I love to tell people is, you know, this new generation of people that are emerging, you know, ages 20 and younger or whatever, is the most disconnected from nature in the history of humanity. And one of the things that the bees do is allow us to understand that we are connected to the flowers. The bees make that connection. We require the bees to get all that pollination of those fruits and all that loveliness we like to eat. And if we don't remember and we don't continually embrace that connection, we're going to have some serious problems generating food. And so the bees really sync that up. It kind of links the farm to the city in ways that other species simply don't. So I definitely recommend, you know, taking some moments in your beekeeping and just having that level of appreciation and letting other people know how important they are and how important it is for you as a beekeeper to do your best to care for these bees. So a lot of people keep the bees for honey purposes, but there's a lot of reasons to keep bees. So recently I've been eating more pollen, and it's not that hard to get a little bit of pollen for yourself. And the pollen sells for quite a bit. So it might be something interesting for those of you that are out there beginning beekeepers. I burn a beeswax candle at least once a day. They're all really small and they only last for like 10 minutes, but like, oh, it just lightens my life up. Another thing, especially for the wax, I like to do is when it's warm, maybe not 112 or 116 like it was this year. When it's warm, I'll put a little dish in my car and put some beeswax in there, and I'll leave the windows rolled up. So as the beeswax melts because of the heat, it just smells my car like beeswax. And it's just so lovely and it's amazing. So definitely appreciate your bees. I wanted to impose upon you all this evening, you know, these are amazing creatures. The season's coming. We can get all hyped up about it, and it's okay to just simply appreciate and enjoy and love your bees. 22, the other side of the coin. What is your plan for the Varroa mite? We're not going to go into all the details. Feel free to fill up the chat, question number 22. But in today's world, this is something that we have to be very, very pressed about. Here's some of the data that we've got over the past few years. Oh gosh, it's almost been like 7-8 years now of mite counts in terms of percent infection rate by zip code. So here's a series of zip codes. 3% is sort of this economic threshold where, you know, above that, you're going to start losing money, and below that, you will save some money. And basically, you know, you're going to lose money because the colonies are going to start dying or having some negative influences. These are average values. So all of these reddish orange bars have average values of mite infestations that are above threshold. This is cataclysmic, and I hope it's not too insensitive to state that this is far worse than COVID in terms of what's happening to the colonies out there. I mean, it is cataclysmic what is happening. 40 to 50% losses every year. And, you know, it's something we need to plan for. So as a beginning beekeeper, start thinking about this plan. And, you know, PSBA will have classes. There's plenty of literature out there to make sure you're well acquainted. But it is something that should be in your mind as you start thinking about becoming a beekeeper, moving in first year, second year, start thinking about integrated pest management, vary it up from time to time, okay? So the glory be to the bee for sure, because they're amazing and awesome, but we are animal husbandry caretakers of them. And part of the animal husbandry literature philosophy is to make sure that we don't negatively impact them by the way we do things. And so disease management is a prime concept in that. And again, you know, there'll be lots of literature and announcements and things later. So make sure you have an idea, make sure you have a plan, and just understand you're a mite keeper, probably 99% of you will be, as well as a beekeeper, okay? And that is all I have. Get ready for a full year of beekeeping. The whole year is important, right? In January, you know, fix up your gear. Don't have your bees on all kinds of busted gear. Swap out frames, all, you know, the gears in your, you know, sheds and things like that. And as the season starts to progress, understand what the expectations are. Understand they're going to build up in the spring. They're going to reduce in the fall. These are all things that you're going to have to get in tune with as beginning beekeepers. And we put together a little presentation here for a calendar. If you guys want, I can send some. I can share that out with PSBA. If you want a hard copy, there's a website there, so forth and so on. And we want to make sure that as beginning beekeepers, you guys come well equipped as best as we can, because ultimately we are in this together. Your hives are not isolated from our hives. Your hives are interacting with our hives. They can share mites with each other. We share our stories with each other. We share our success with each other. We share the bad times too. And hopefully, you know, in the near future, we'll share the November meeting and food and all that stuff together at some point again. So today is just to get you all pepped up. And I know we're going to break out into some breakout rooms here pretty quick that are going to be full. Each one's going to have its own awesome story to tell you. So be pepped up, be happy. The bees are amazing. And prepare for mites, prepare for the rest of the awesomeness. Hopefully your boxes are full to the brim and you need help lifting them because they're so heavy. And I wish you all success in the journey ahead. I don't know, Kit, are you going to take it back or how's it going to work?
Yep, it's all mine. And you're so wonderful. You have, every time I ever hear you speak, you just get across your passion and excitement. And it's so contagious. I mean, I don't really need more excitement, but the way you get me like, oh yeah, it's coming, spring's coming. I love my bees.
It's time to go.